Jaimy Gordon, congratulations on winning the National Book Award for 2010. I think your book came out just a couple of days. It was really close. You won the award very soon after your book came out, and it's really well deserved. I think what an impressive book. It's just wonderful in many ways. One of the ways I think it's wonderful is that it's set in West Virginia, and that you really like West Virginia and have lots of connections with the state. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you're connected to West Virginia.
I'm very happy myself to have written a book set in West Virginia, so that now my membership here is in some way fully qualified. West Virginia is probably the first place that I chose to live after having grown up in Baltimore, not for any other reason than that I wanted to be in this beautiful part of the country. It was a border town, Harper's Ferry, at the confluence of the Shenandoah and Potomac rivers. And once I moved there, and at that time there included Maryland, West Virginia, and Virginia, since all those three states come together there, I looked for work. I worked for the Frederick News Post for a while as a food editor, and I soon ran into a horse trainer. I had never had any personal experience of the back stretch before that, but he was very handsome and persuasive and unstable in a way that was hypnotic to me in my early 20s.
And is he the basis for the character Tommy
Definitely.
Hansel in the book?
Definitely he is.
A really fascinating person.
I'm glad you find him.
Right.
So.
Good
I
and
do too,
bad in
actually.
lots of ways.
I mean, I still find him kind of sexy, even though I see the dangers now. But anyway, within 24 hours, I was on the backstretch, walking his hot horses and learning how to feed horses and lock stalls and so forth. Although I continued to keep a regular job until we shipped out of state, I did work on the racetrack from then on until I went back to graduate school, or until I went to graduate school and went back to school in 1970. So from 1967 till 1970, I lived in West Virginia. My post office was Bunker Hill. My town was Midway, and right through the back pasture ran the Opequon Creek. That was the southern border of the property, and I loved it there. I missed it sorely when I went to graduate school, and when my sister Hilary, a few years later, decided that she wanted to move from Baltimore, where she'd gone to art school, to someplace where she could afford a farm. I hoped that she would go to West Virginia, and she did, but she couldn't by that time afford anything in the eastern panhandle, so she went to the northern panhandle. So my two long experiences of West Virginia are in the panhandles. She lives not far from New Martinsville.
I'd like to get back to the racetrack just for a minute, because your racetrack in the book, in Lord of Misrule, is a fictitious track. But
That's
you
right.
said, I believe you worked at the racetrack at Charlestown.
That's right. I learned at the Charlestown tracks. There were two at that time, Shenandoah Downs and Charlestown. And as I mentioned, we often shipped out to even cheaper tracks. Those were low enough, but there were lower ones yet. And the two around Wheeling were the most notorious. The ones with the cheapest races and the lowliest reputations, shall we say.
All I know about Charlestown is that John Brown was hanged there.
Right.
So, is that racetrack a half mile?
It's definitely.
But the ones in Wheeling are more like the one in your book. Is it a half-mile track in Charlestown?
Oh yes, and by now it's actually kind of a glitzy track, I'm told, by Washington D.C. people have told me I wouldn't recognize it, because they legalized slot machines and they have money pouring in. They even have $1 million race there. $1 million was just a rumor that anything like that existed in the world when I worked on those racetracks. But the Wheeling tracks, as I say, were low even to people at Charlestown, and Now, why didn't I just use those 2 real tracks? Because I do mention the Charlestown tracks in the book. I really didn't have much personal experience of the West Virginia bull rings, as they were, I mean of the wheeling bull rings. I went other places. I liked the idea of setting it in Moundsville because I've driven that road up and down the Ohio River hundreds and hundreds of times. It fascinates me that there is a South State prison exactly where I wanted to put my racetrack, so I just evaporated the state prison. But
The Indian Mound Downs.
that's
there.
right, Indian Mound Downs is there. And I pay homage in a way to the fact that there's a state prison.
Right, I think there's a part at the beginning of the book where you mention
Exactly.
sort of the penitentiary as an aside. Do you think you
That
could
is
read
those
a
who
little bit
yes,
from that
I'd be glad
beginning?
to. Those who recognize the geography, and a lot of West Virginia people do, might see this kind of sidewise reference. This is from the point of view of Medicine Ed, an old-timey African-American groom from South Carolina who's never done anything except work on the racetrack his whole life. Inside the back gate of Indian Mound Downs, a hot walking machine creaked round and round. In the judgment of Medicine Ed, walking a horse himself on the shed row of Barn Z, the going nowhere contraption must be the lost soul of this cheap racetrack where he'd been ended up at. It was stuck there in the gate, so you couldn't get out. It filled up the whole road between a hill of horse manure against the backside fence, stubbled with pale, dirty straw like a penitentiary haircut, and a long red puddle in the red dirt, a puddle that was almost a pond. Right down to the sore horses at each point of the silver star. It resembled some woe-begone carnival ride, some skeleton of a 2-bit ride dreamed up by a dreamer too tired to dream. There'd been no rain all August, and by now the fresh-worked horses were half lost in the pink cloud of their own shuffling. Red dust from those West Virginia hills rode in their wide-open nostrils and stuck to their squeeze-box lungs. Red dust, working its devilment, he observed to himself. But he shut his mouth. They were not his horses.
I love the character of Medicine Ed and Two Tie. And one of the things that keep the West Virginia connection going, I love that Pelter, the best horse really, was a West Virginia horse and was field bred.
You know, I made up the names for all the other horses in the book, although they weren't made up out of nowhere. They had symbolic meanings. Pelter was the real name of my horse, the horse that I worked on, that I loved, who was a West Virginia bred, field bred horse. At least that was the legend. And, you know, I've tried to find, I'm sure if I looked hard enough, if I actually looked at archives of newspapers from that era, I could find some reference. But I think it was a kind of a local fame, and the kind of fame that disappears into oblivion completely after 15, 20 years. But still, I love that horse, and the description of the horse, everything about him is actual.
I wondered because I think I had read somewhere that somebody, John Hawkes maybe, told you make the horses as much characters as the people, and I really think you do that. They're all fascinating, the four main horses and the main characters.
Thank you.
And Pelter especially, the relationship between Pelter and Maggie. So are you a horse person? Are you an animal person?
I'm an animal person, certainly, and I would certainly have been drawn to horses at any time that I had an opportunity to make their deeper acquaintance, and the racetrack presented that opportunity. But I had already owned lots and lots of birds. In an episode when I lived in California, I always had dogs. I've had dogs, birds, horses, and cats all at the same time, living fairly communal life together. Large animals have something especially poignant about them. They seem I mean, they're bigger than we are and stronger, but they're also so fragile in some way. And to have seen the deaths of racehorses, or seen them crippled or injured, is always a kind of overwhelming experience.
And I think the way you make them come to life as personalities makes you almost equate the horses and the people. You know, the horses don't have much control over their fate, and yet you also think, well, the people don't have much control over their fate either. So it's really nice. They almost seem on a par, the horses and the people, to me, in the book.
And I think that's true. They're not, although there's not a one-to-one relation
Right.
between the four major point of views and the four, or points of view and the four horses, still there's a symmetry of a kind.
Right, and you care about all of it. Or at least to me, one of
Yeah.
the great things about the book is the characters are so sympathetic, the horses and the people and the characters. Do you feel like, I mean, I love the book. What do you love anything about, what does the book mean to you? Do you feel like you were at the sort of the top of your game when you were writing that toward the end? I know it's gone through some different stages, but how do you feel about the book?
I wasn't sure that I had written my best book when I finished it. I did think that it had more potential for being a popular book or having some popular appeal than anything that I'd written before. Why? Well, it's a sports book, for one thing. It has a fairly exciting plot, fairly impressive body count, if you're into that kind of thing. And I mean, I did feel that I'd set out to do what I'd wanted. I wanted to write now a novel not just about one person, one person's consciousness, however intimately portrayed. I wanted to write a social novel, but I wanted to write about a community that's usually below the horizon of respectable middle-class life. It's something that interests me.
And I think you do it with such respect. I mean, there's no condescension. It's just you really dignify
Thank you.
those lives
Thank you.
that some people might not see as having dignity.
Well, thank you. I would never even have thought of them for a minute as anything but on a par with myself at that. I mean, when I was there, I was there. No, it was my world too. But many people have said, what was a nice girl like you with a decent education working on the racetrack? I couldn't get there fast enough. It's when I had the opportunity. It was so exciting, interesting, and different from anything I'd done. And it had the horses, so I couldn't wait. And it had that good-looking guy too.
Right, the good-looking sort of crazy guy,
But like
it
Maggie,
really
I was
intrigued.
aware that I was, in some sense, living somebody else's life, that I was borrowing somebody else's
right. You could get out.
world. Well,
in a way
that was
Meta-
the
maybe Maggie could.
that was the
And
thought
that's-
that I could get out. But when I went to graduate school, it was definitely with a sense, time has come. It's now or never. I've really, things have gotten a little out of hand here, and it's
You
time to
could
go
need
and
to
do
step
something
back on
else.
something that wasn't shifting.
Yes, I would say so.
Well, the book is just full of poetry and symbols that are really haunting. It has an exciting plot and fascinating characters and symbols that you go so far beyond just a story. Calling one horse Spinoza, little Spinoza, whose mother is a little Dutch girl or something like that,
Right.
and then
He comes from this family of horses that are named for philosophers.
Right,
So
right.
He's a speculation grandson, and in between comes a horse named Platonic.
Platonic
who
is in there
Medicine Ed had
somewhere.
worked on, who was a great horse.